There's another problem. The targets are next to impossible to meet.
Take a look at some of these sort of mid-major nations in Europe, Spain, Portugal, etc. Their emissions are going up like crazy, 50-60%.
As a matter of fact, meeting targets is such a problem, some countries are resorting to more drastic measures.
There are examples of Chinese factories that are being used to buy credits for European countries. So European countries can say, well, we can pollute because we're reducing pollution in China.
It's an indulgence.
Europe, especially, is having issues. Of the main 15 European nations to ratify Kyoto, only 2 say they will actually meet their targets, the UK and Sweden. 6 more countries say, well, you know, with a little more work and a lot more money, we might be able to make things kind of happen. And the remaining 7? They're not even pretending. They say there's no way they'll ever meet their targets.
The writers underestimated the demand for energy that people have, that you just will not be able to withdraw energy from people once they've had it.
John Christie is the director of the Earth System Science Center at the University of Alabama and the state's climatologist. Christie played a major role in the 2001 science report used to mold the direction of the Kyoto Protocol.
In IPCC 2001, I was a lead author.
The IPCC report, brought to you by the United Nations, is the supposed consensus you're always hearing about. The one, when translated by alarmists, is the call to action because of the dire consequences of global warming on the Earth.
We have to make this report so dramatic.
But Christie says what he saw behind the scenes was more alarming than those alleged dire consequences.
I was at a table with 3 Europeans. We were having lunch. And they were talking about their role as lead authors. And they were talking about how they were trying to make the report so dramatic that the United States would just have to sign up to the Kyoto Protocol.
Don't be poor in a hot country.
Since then, several more reports have been issued.
Don't live in Hurricane Alley.
The most recent report was released this past April.
Watch out about being on the coasts or in the Arctic,
where the current lead author described their findings.
If you're in a Mediterranean climate, you're going to have a fire season in the summer. It's really going to be a problem.
All scientists are affected by bias, every single one of them.
The Kyoto Protocol is probably the best example of something working precisely as it was designed, just to fail. The Kyoto Protocol is dead.
When Al Gore testified before Congress on global warming just a couple of months ago, it was a media circus. But also testifying that day without any fanfare or really any coverage was Bjorn Lomborg. He's the author of the best-selling book, The Skeptical Environmentalist. He's an expert on the economic impact of global warming. Bjorn, you are not a scientist, you're a political scientist, so I'm not going to ask you any science questions. I want to ask you, as a guy who believes in man-made global warming, why don't you think Kyoto is the solution?
Well, essentially exactly because of what you showed in the clip. Kyoto is at the same time impossibly ambitious and yet entirely inconsequential when you talk about the environment. It'll cost lots of money and end up doing virtually no good. That's not a good deal.
Let me show the chart.
What we need to look at is to try to find smarter ways.
This is the chart. This is the impact of Kyoto here on this chart compared to if we do nothing?
Yes. Basically, no change. It'll basically postpone global warming for about 5 years at the end of the century.
Okay,
that's not a very good deal.
Let me play devil's advocate here. Al Gore has made mention of malaria a lot. Some people say we could save 100,000 people on malaria alone if we do something about global warming. Why wouldn't we save 100,000 people?
We could probably save about 85 million people from malaria if we did something about malaria. These people are suffering right now. Why is it we're talking about making very expensive moves, doing virtually no good 100 years from now, when there are real people that we can really save very cheaply from malaria right now?
Okay, we just had a situation, I don't remember what it was, just a few years ago, where we had a massive heat wave in Europe. 35,000 people in France alone died. Another 2,000 people died from this heat wave in England. If we don't stop global warming, won't things just get worse and worse and more people will die just from the heat?
Glenn, that's exactly true. And that's, of course, what Al Gore tells us. With global warming, you're going to see more heat deaths. But what most people don't tell us is we're also going to see much less cold deaths. And actually, many more people die from cold than from heat. So for England alone, you mentioned the number 2,000 people. Actually, that's what we expect will die from more heat waves in 2080. But what we have to remember is that 20,000 fewer will die from cold each year in 2080. Now, I'm not sitting and saying we should just go for global warming, but I'm saying we need to know both.
Okay. You started something called the Copenhagen Consensus, and this was a group of experts from the UN, economists, et cetera, and you prioritized all of the world's biggest problems and where we would be most effective in spending our money. AIDS was number one, right?
Yes. And basically the point is, again, to say we have a tendency to bark up the wrong tree. We worry intensely about climate change, but the point is we can do very little good at very high cost. Let's focus on where we can actually do a lot of good. If we care about this planet, if we care about its environment, shouldn't we do where we can do the most good first? What these Nobel laureates basically told us was if we spend our money on HIV/AIDS, we can do $40 worth of good for every dollar. If we spend it on Koyoto, we can only do 30 cents. Let's do the $40 first.
Give me the top 5 quickly, and where does global warming fall on that list?
Basically, what they told us was it was HIV/AIDS, malnutrition, free trade, malaria, and agricultural research. Those are things that we can do cheaply and do an immense amount of impact in this world right now, and also for future generations. Koyoto came down at the bottom, not because climate change is not real, but simply because the way we tackle it through Koyoto is very expensive and a very poor way of helping the world.
Bjorn, thanks. Coming up, Al Gore and his inconvenient truths, plus scientists silenced for questioning the threat of global warming.
I know that I've had several friends who have essentially been told that if you speak out on climate change, you must do so as an independent citizen. If you do so through our organization or through our institution, you will essentially be fired.
And later, how the media is feeding you fear.
I'm going to tell you something about the media and global warming that you don't hear real often. It's not all your fault, okay?
More of Exposed, the Climate of Fear, in a minute.